History books say the Aztecs started in Mexico. But what if that's wrong? What if their true home was hidden in the red rocks of Utah? New clues from old cave art and ancient maps point to something shocking. The Aztec people might have crossed what we now call the border. And they did it 1,000 years before Columbus ever sailed. Their legends speak of a sacred place, a homeland called Aztlán. For centuries, no one knew where it was, but some researchers think they found it. They say it's in Utah. Could this change everything we know? Could this forbidden history rewrite the books? Stay with me. What we're about to find might shock you. The Aztecs had a story. They told it for hundreds of years. It was a story about where they came from. They called this place Aztlán. In their language, it means place of whiteness or place of herons. But no one knew where Aztlán really was. It became one of history's greatest mysteries. The Aztecs wrote their history in books. These books were called codices. They drew pictures and symbols. These symbols told their story. One of these books is the Orbin Codex. It says the Aztec people left Aztlán long ago. But why did they leave? The legends give different answers. Some say Aztlán was like paradise. It had clear water and rich soil. Birds filled the sky. The people lived in peace. But then something changed. The stories say a god spoke to them. This god was called Huitzilopochtli. He told them to leave. He said they must find a new home. Therefore, the Aztec people began a long journey. They travelled for many years. Some stories say they walked for 200 years. They were looking for a sign. The god told them what to find. They must find an eagle sitting on a cactus. And this eagle must be eating a snake. Finally, they found this sign. It was on an island in a lake. This lake was in the Valley of Mexico. There they built their great city. They called it Tenochtitlan. Today we know this place as Mexico City. But the mystery of Aztlán remained. Where did they start? Where was their first home? Other legends say something different. They say Aztlán wasn't paradise at all. Some old texts describe it as a hard place. The people there had cruel rulers. These rulers made the people work too hard. They took too much food. Therefore, the Aztec people wanted to escape. The stories also mention 7 caves. These caves were called Chicamostoc. 7 tribes came from these caves. The Aztecs were one of these tribes. They called themselves the Mexica. This name is where Mexico comes from. But here's the strange part. Different codices show different things. Some show Aztlán as an island. Some show it as mountains. Some show rivers and red rocks. The pictures don't match. Therefore, historians got confused. Was Aztlán even real, or was it just a myth? For many people, this question matters deeply. Aztlán is more than an old story. It's part of their identity. Many Mexican Americans see Aztlán as their cultural homeland. It connects them to their roots. It gives them pride in where they came from. But the question remains. If Aztlán was real, where was it? Historians have looked everywhere. Some say Aztlán was in western Mexico, maybe in the state of Nayarit. There's a small island there called Mexcaltitan. It looks like the pictures in some codices. It has canals. It has a special shape. Some people think this might be Aztlán, but others aren't sure. The clues don't all fit. The legends mention things that Mexcaltitan doesn't have. They mention 4 rivers. They mention red rocks. They mention specific symbols in the sky. Therefore, the search continued. And then, something unexpected happened. Researchers found clues in a place no one expected. They found them in Utah. This shocked many people. Utah? That's in the United States. It's far north of Mexico. How could the Aztec homeland be there? But the researchers had evidence, or at least they thought they did. The legends described Aztlán with specific details. They mentioned land that was red. They mentioned 4 rivers that came together. They mentioned 7 caves. They mentioned symbols in the rocks. And when researchers looked at Utah, they found all of these things. But could it be true? Could the Aztecs have come from what is now American land? The idea was controversial. Many scholars didn't believe it. They said the evidence was weak. They said people were seeing what they wanted to see. Yet the theory wouldn't go away. More researchers began to look. They found more connections. They found rock art that looked like Aztec symbols. They found rivers that matched the legends. They found caves in the right places. The mystery deepened. On one side, there were bold claims backed by intriguing clues. On the other side, there were skeptical scholars who demanded better proof. The debate became heated. It touched on questions of identity, history, and truth. Therefore, we must look at the evidence. We must see what these researchers found. We must hear what the skeptics say. And then, we must decide for ourselves. Is Utah really Aztlán? Or is this just another false lead in a centuries-old mystery? The answer might change how we see history. It might change how we understand borders. It might change how we think about who belongs where. These are not small questions. They matter today just as much as they mattered 500 years ago. So let's begin our investigation. Let's look at the clues. Let's follow the trail these researchers found. Let's see where it leads us. In the 1980s, two researchers made a bold claim. Their names were Cecilio Orozco and Alfonso Rivas Salmon. Orozco taught at California State University in Fresno. Rivas Salmon worked at a university in Guadalajara, Mexico. They spent years studying the Aztlán mystery, and they believed they solved it. They said Aztlán was in Utah. This wasn't a wild guess. They had done research, they had read the old codices, they had studied the legends, and they had traveled to Utah. There, they saw something that amazed them. The land matched the descriptions. The red rocks were there. The rivers were there. Even the symbols were there, carved into stone. But most historians didn't believe them. They thought the idea was crazy. Utah was too far north. It didn't make sense. Therefore, Orozco and Rivas had to show their evidence. They had to prove their case. They started with the land itself. The Aztec legends described Aztlán as a place of red earth and stone. When you look at Utah's canyon lands, you see exactly that. The rocks are bright red. They glow in the sun. The canyons are deep and beautiful. It's easy to imagine ancient people living there. The legends also mentioned 4 rivers. Orozco and Rivas found 4 rivers in Utah. The Green River flows there. So does the San Juan River. The Colorado River runs through the canyons. And there's another branch where these rivers meet. 4 rivers, just like the legend said. But that wasn't all. They found something even more interesting. On the canyon walls, there was art. Ancient people had carved pictures into the rock. These pictures are called petroglyphs. They're very old. Some might be thousands of years old. And according to Orozco and Rivas, these petroglyphs looked Aztec. They saw snakes with rattles on their tails. They saw symbols that looked like the Aztec calendar. They saw rope patterns with knots. These knots might represent numbers. In Aztec culture, knots were used to count time and track the stars. Therefore, they concluded that Aztec people had been in Utah, or at least their ancestors had been there. These petroglyphs were proof. They showed that the connection was real, but there was more evidence. An old map surfaced. This map was from 1847. It was made during a treaty negotiation. On this map, someone had marked a location. The label said Aztlán, and the mark was in Utah. A researcher named Dillman found this map. He studied old documents for years. This map seemed to support the Utah theory, but critics questioned it. They said the map might not be reliable. Maps from that time often had errors, and the label could have been added later. Still, the map added fuel to the fire. It showed that people in the 1800s might have known something. Maybe there was an oral tradition. Maybe native tribes in Utah had told early settlers about their connection to Mexico. Maybe the story had been passed down for generations. Orozco and Rivas also pointed to identity. For many Mexican Americans, this theory mattered. It meant their ancestors' homeland was on both sides of the border. It meant the border itself was artificial. It cut through their cultural heritage. Therefore, proving Aztlán was in Utah became more than just history. It became political. Some people embraced the theory. They saw it as reclaiming their past. They saw it as challenging the dominant narrative. History books had always been written by certain people. Those people often ignored or erased indigenous histories. But here was a chance to tell a different story. Others were more cautious. They wanted to believe, but they needed better proof. Petroglyphs could be interpreted many ways. Rivers were common, and maps could be wrong. They asked for more evidence. They asked for artifacts. They asked for DNA. They asked for something concrete. But Orozco and Rivas stood by their work. They published papers. They gave lectures. They showed photographs. They drew connections between Utah rock art and Aztec codices. They measured angles and counted symbols. They tried to build a scientific case. The academic world mostly rejected them. Archaeologists in Utah were skeptical. They said the rock art was older than the Aztecs. They said the styles didn't match. They said Orozco and Rivas were making connections that weren't there. Therefore, the debate reached a stalemate. Believers had their evidence. Skeptics had their doubts. Neither side could convince the other. The mystery remained unsolved. But the question lingered. What if they were right? What if mainstream scholars were missing something? What if the truth was hidden in plain sight, carved into canyon walls for anyone willing to see? We need to look closer at the evidence. We need to see these symbols for ourselves. Let's examine the rock art. Let's see what stories the stones tell. The canyon walls hold secrets. Ancient hands carved pictures into the red stone. These pictures have lasted for hundreds or thousands of years. Wind and rain haven't erased them. They're still there, waiting to be read. But what do they mean? This is where the debate gets interesting. Orozco and Rivas looked at these pictures and saw Aztec connections. Other archaeologists looked at the same pictures and saw something else. They saw older cultures. They saw different meanings. Let's look at the evidence. In Barrier Canyon, there's rock art everywhere. The style is unique. These pictures show tall, ghost-like figures. They have big eyes. They have broad shoulders. Some hold shields. Some hold strange objects. These figures are called the Barrier Canyon style. Scientists have dated this art. Some of it is very old. It might be 3,000 years old or more. Therefore, it was made long before the Aztecs built Tenochtitlan. It was made before the Aztecs even existed as a nation. But Orozco and Rivas weren't focused on these ghost figures. They were looking at other symbols. They found snakes. They found spirals. They found patterns that looked like ropes with knots. In one location, they found something specific. It was in Sego Canyon. There was a picture of knotted strings. One string had 5 strands. Another had 8 strands. These numbers meant something to Orozco. He said they represented the Venus cycle. The planet Venus was important to the Aztecs. They tracked it carefully. They knew its patterns. Venus disappears from the sky for 8 days. Then it returns. The Aztecs built their calendar around this cycle. They used it to plan ceremonies and wars. Therefore, Orozco said, this knotted string was proof. Someone in Utah knew about the Venus cycle. Someone in Utah was doing the same math as the Aztecs. The connection was clear, but critics weren't convinced. They pointed out problems. First, lots of cultures tracked Venus. The Maya did. The Hopi did. Many native groups watched the stars. Finding Venus patterns didn't prove Aztec presence. It just proved ancient people were smart and observant. Second, The knotted strings might not be about Venus at all. They might represent something else. Maybe they showed trade routes. Maybe they showed family connections. Maybe they were just decorative. Without written text, we're just guessing. Third, the style was wrong. Aztec art has a specific look. It's detailed and structured. It uses specific shapes and symbols. The Utah petroglyphs didn't match this style. They looked different. They felt different. Therefore, mainstream archaeologists rejected the connection. They said Orozco and Rivas were forcing interpretations. They were seeing what they wanted to see. This is called confirmation bias. It happens when people look for evidence that supports their beliefs and ignore evidence that doesn't. But let's look at more symbols. There's rock art showing snakes with rattles. Rattlesnakes live in Utah, so ancient people would have seen them. They would have drawn them. But the Aztecs also valued rattlesnakes. The feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, was sacred. Rattlesnakes appeared in Aztec art and myths. Does this connection mean anything? Or is it coincidence? Snakes are common in many cultures. Drawing them doesn't prove Aztec presence. It might just prove that both cultures lived in areas where rattlesnakes exist. Orozco pointed to other details. He found spiral patterns. Spirals appear in Aztec codices. They represent movement and time. They show cycles and seasons. When he found spirals in Utah, he said they matched Aztec meaning. But spirals are universal. Almost every ancient culture drew spirals. You find them in Ireland. You find them in Australia. You find them in South America. Humans seem drawn to this shape. Therefore, finding spirals in Utah doesn't prove much. It just proves Utah's ancient people were part of human culture. Still, there's something compelling about the symbols. When you stand in these canyons, when you see these marks, you feel something. You feel a connection to the past. You wonder who made them. You wonder what they were trying to say. You wonder if their blood still flows in people alive today. Some of the rock art shows handprints. Ancient people pressed their palms against the stone. Then they blew paint around their hands. The result is a negative image, a ghost hand on the wall. These handprints are touching. They say, "I was here, I existed, remember me." Were any of these hands Aztec? Were any of these artists the ancestors of the people who built Tenochtitlan? We don't know. DNA testing might help. But rock art can't give us DNA. We would need bones or other remains. What we have are questions. We have intriguing patterns and possible connections. We have symbols that might mean something or might mean nothing. We have researchers who see one thing and critics who see another. Therefore, the rock art doesn't settle the debate. It deepens the mystery. It gives us tantalizing clues, but no clear answers. We need more evidence. We need to look at the land itself. We need to see if Utah's geography matches the legends. Let's talk about rivers and caves. Let's see if the land tells us anything the symbols couldn't. The Aztec legends described specific things. They mentioned 4 rivers. They mentioned 7 caves. They mentioned a land of red stone. When Orozco and Rivas looked at Utah, they found all of these things. But did they really match? Or were they forcing the connection? Let's start with the rivers. The legends say 4 rivers came together near Aztlán. This detail appears in several codices. The rivers were important. They gave water. They gave life. They helped define the sacred geography. In southeast Utah, 4 rivers do come together. The Green River flows south. The San Juan River flows west. They meet the Colorado River. And there are other branches and tributaries. If you draw these rivers on a map, they form a pattern. They converge in the canyonlands. Orozco and Rivas said this matched perfectly. The 4 rivers of legend were the 4 rivers of Utah. Therefore, this was where Aztlán must be. But critics pointed out a problem. 4 rivers coming together isn't unique. Rivers converge in many places. You can find this pattern all over the world. Just because Utah has 4 rivers doesn't make it Aztlán. You need more evidence. What about the 7 caves? This is another key detail. The legends speak of Chikamostok. This means place of 7 caves. 7 tribes emerged from these caves. The Aztecs were one of them. This story is central to their origin myth. Are there 7 caves in Utah? Some researchers say yes. They point to Antelope Island. This island sits in the Great Salt Lake. According to some accounts, it has 7 caves. Therefore, it could be Chikamostok. But again, critics aren't convinced. Antelope Island is far from the river convergence. It's in a different part of Utah. Can one location have both the 4 rivers and the 7 caves? The geography doesn't quite fit. And there's another problem. 7 is a sacred number. It appears in many cultures. 7 might be symbolic, not literal. There might not have been exactly 7 caves. The number might represent completion or perfection. Trying to find 7 actual caves might miss the point. Still, the geographic matches are intriguing. Utah's landscape is unique. The red rocks are dramatic. The canyons are deep. The rivers cut through stone. It's a landscape that stays in your memory. It's a landscape that would define a people's identity. Now let's talk about language. This is where things get really interesting. The Aztec language is called Nahuatl. It's part of a larger language family called Uto-Aztecan. This family includes many languages. Some are spoken in Mexico, but others are spoken much farther north. The Ute people live in Utah. Their language is part of the Uto-Aztecan family. Therefore, they're linguistically related to the Aztecs. They share common roots. At some point in the distant past, their ancestors spoke the same language. Does this prove the Aztecs came from Utah? Not exactly. Language families are complex. They spread over time. People migrate. Languages split and change. Just because 2 languages are related doesn't mean one came from the location of the other. But it does suggest ancient connections. It suggests that people moved between these regions. It suggests interactions we don't fully understand. The Uto-Aztecan family is widespread. It stretches from Utah to El Salvador. How did one language family spread so far? What migrations made this possible? Some researchers think the language spread from south to north. They think the Proto-Uto-Aztecan language started in Mexico. Then people carried it north into Utah and beyond. If this is true, then the Utah theory is backwards. The Aztecs' ancestors wouldn't have come from Utah. Instead, earlier peoples brought the language to Utah from the south. But other researchers think differently. They think the language might have spread from north to south. If this is true, then the Utah theory makes more sense. People in Utah might have spoken an early form of Uto-Aztecan. Then some of them migrated south. Eventually, their descendants became the Aztecs. The linguistic evidence doesn't give us a clear answer. It shows connections, but it doesn't show direction. It doesn't tell us which way the people moved. Therefore, both sides can use the same evidence to support different conclusions. What about cultural practices? Are there similarities beyond language? Some researchers point to religious ideas. The Ute people have creation stories. Some of these stories mention emergence from underground. The Aztecs also have emergent stories. Both cultures valued the directions: north, south, east, west. Both cultures tracked the stars. But again, these similarities are broad. Many indigenous cultures have emergent stories. Many cultures value the 4 directions. These might be universal human patterns. They might not prove specific connections. Therefore, the geographic and linguistic evidence is mixed. It's suggestive, but not conclusive. Utah has the right landscape. It has linguistic connections. It has 4 rivers and possible caves. But none of this proves the Aztecs came from there. What we need is harder evidence. We need artifacts. We need clear cultural markers. We need something that says Aztec people were definitely here. Rock art alone isn't enough. Rivers and caves aren't enough. language families aren't enough, but there's one more piece to consider. There's the question of identity. For many people, this isn't just about evidence, it's about who they are. It's about reclaiming a history. Let's hear what the skeptics say. Let's see why mainstream scholars reject the Utah theory. Science demands proof. Archaeology demands evidence. And when Orozco and Rivas presented their Utah theory, most scientists said no. The evidence wasn't strong enough. The connections were too loose. The theory didn't hold up. Let's hear their arguments. Let's understand why the academic world rejected this idea. First, there's the rock art. Utah archaeologists have studied these petroglyphs for decades. They've dated them using different methods. Many of these pictures are very old. The Barrier Canyon style might date back 3,000 years or more. The Aztec Empire didn't exist until about 1300 AD. Therefore, most of Utah's rock art was created long before the Aztecs. Even if some rock art is newer, it doesn't look Aztec. Aztec art has specific characteristics. It's geometric, it's detailed, it uses specific symbols in specific ways. Utah petroglyphs don't match this style. They look like what they are, Southwestern Native American art. They belong to the cultures that lived in Utah, not to the Aztecs. The snake symbols don't prove anything. Rattlesnakes live throughout the American West. Every culture in this region would have known them. Drawing a snake doesn't make you Aztec, it just makes you observant. The knotted rope patterns are interesting, but they're not unique. Knot-based counting systems existed in many cultures. The Inca used quipu, complex knotted strings. Other cultures used tally marks and notches. Finding knots in rock art doesn't prove Aztec mathematics. It just proves ancient people could count. Therefore, the rock art evidence falls apart under scrutiny. It's based on surface similarities. It ignores the deeper stylistic differences. It forces connections that aren't really there. Second, there's the geography. Yes, Utah has 4 rivers, but so do many other places. The number 4 appears often in nature. 4 directions, 4 seasons. Choosing 4 rivers as proof is arbitrary. You could find 4 rivers almost anywhere if you looked hard enough. The 7 caves are even more problematic. Antelope Island is far from the river convergence. You can't have Aztlán in 2 places at once. And as we mentioned, 7 is likely symbolic. Looking for exactly 7 caves misses the symbolic meaning. What about the overall landscape? Yes, Utah has red rocks, but so does much of the American Southwest. Red sandstone appears in Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado. The Aztecs could have come from any of these places if you only consider red rocks. Therefore, the geographic evidence is weak. It's based on coincidences. It doesn't prove Utah was special or unique as the Aztec homeland. Third, there's the historical problem. We have no artifacts. Despite years of searching, no one has found clearly Aztec objects in Utah. No pottery, no tools, no buildings. No evidence of Nahuatl speakers living there. Archaeology is built on physical evidence. Without artifacts, you have nothing. If the Aztecs or their ancestors lived in Utah for generations, they would have left traces. They would have left trash heaps. They would have left broken tools. They would have left evidence of their presence. But we haven't found this evidence. The archaeological record doesn't support the theory. Fourth, there's the myth versus history problem. Many scholars believe Aztlán wasn't a real place. They think it was mythological. It was a spiritual homeland, not a geographic one. It represented the beginning of the Aztec people's journey. It was where their identity formed. But it might not have been an actual location you could visit. Myths serve important purposes. They give people identity. They explain origins. They create meaning. But they're not always literal. Taking every detail of the Aztlán legend as geographic fact might be a mistake. Therefore, Trying to locate Aztlán on a map might miss the point entirely. Fifth, there are alternative theories. Other researchers have proposed other locations. Some point to Lake Pátzcuaro in Michoacán, Mexico. Others suggest the island of Mexcaltitan in Nayarit. These locations are in Mexico. They're closer to where the Aztec Empire actually existed. They're more plausible migration starting points. The linguistic evidence also doesn't help the Utah theory. Yes, Uto-Aztecan languages exist in Utah, but most linguists think the language family originated farther south. They think it spread northward over thousands of years. This doesn't support the idea that the Aztecs came from Utah. It suggests the opposite. Finally, there's the question of motivation. Why do some people want to believe in the Utah theory? Critics suggest it's not really about evidence. It's about identity politics. It's about claiming that Mexican-American roots extend into the United States. It's about challenging borders and national narratives. These are valid concerns, but they're not scientific questions. Science should be neutral. It should follow the evidence wherever it leads. Therefore, mixing politics with archaeology creates problems. It makes it harder to see the truth clearly. The mainstream scholarly consensus is clear. Aztlán in Utah is not supported by credible evidence. It's a fringe theory. It's based on wishful thinking and loose interpretations. Most archaeologists, linguists, and historians reject it. But does that end the discussion? Not quite. The debate continues. Some people still believe. They still search for evidence. They still hope to prove the mainstream scholars wrong. And maybe, just maybe, future discoveries will change our understanding. Or maybe not. Let's look at what all of this means. Let's consider the implications. Let's think about why this debate matters. So what do we have? We have a bold theory. We have intriguing clues. We have passionate believers and skeptical scientists. We have a mystery that refuses to die. Let's recap what we've learned. The Aztec legends describe a homeland called Aztlán. This place had red rocks, 4 rivers, and 7 caves. Researchers Orozco and Rivas believe they found Aztlán in Utah. They point to rock art, river patterns, and linguistic connections. But most scholars reject their theory. They say the evidence is weak and the interpretations are forced. Both sides have arguments. Neither side has definitive proof. Therefore, the mystery continues. Aztlán remains lost, whether it existed or not. But this story is about more than just finding an old location. It's about identity. It's about who gets to tell history. It's about whose voices matter. For many Mexican Americans, Aztlán represents their roots. It connects them to a proud heritage. It gives them a sense of belonging. When people say Aztlán was in Utah, they're saying something important. They're saying their ancestors' homeland crosses the modern border. They're saying the border itself is artificial and new. This matters because borders divide people. Borders create us and them. Borders determine who belongs and who doesn't. But indigenous peoples lived here long before borders existed. Their territories didn't respect lines on maps. Their identities weren't divided by nations. Therefore, claiming Aztlán was in Utah is a political act. It challenges how we think about land and belonging. It questions who is native to what place. It suggests that Mexican Americans have roots in the American Southwest that go back centuries or millennia. But there's a danger here too. If we make claims without solid evidence, we undermine our credibility. If we see patterns where none exist, we're not discovering truth. We're creating comfortable fictions. And fictions, however meaningful, won't stand up to scrutiny. Science matters. Evidence matters. We can't just believe what we want to believe. We need facts. We need proof. Otherwise, history becomes whatever we want it to be, and that helps no one. So where does that leave us? We have an unsolved mystery. We have insufficient evidence. We have a debate that mixes science, identity, and politics. It's complicated. What would it take to prove the Utah theory? We would need artifacts. We would need bones that we could test for DNA. We would need clear evidence of Nahuatl-speaking people living in Utah. We would need architectural remains or distinctive tools. We would need something undeniable. Modern technology might help. Ground-penetrating radar can find hidden structures. LiDAR can map ancient landscapes. DNA analysis can trace migrations. These tools didn't exist when Orozco and Rivas did their original research. Maybe new studies with better technology would find what they couldn't. Or maybe not. Maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe Aztlán was never in Utah. Maybe it was in Mexico. Maybe it wasn't anywhere because it was never a real place. Maybe the legends were symbolic from the start. But the search itself is valuable. The search makes us ask questions. It makes us challenge assumptions. It makes us look at history from different angles. Even if the Utah theory is wrong, the debate has taught us things. It's shown us how important place and identity are. It's shown us how myths shape our understanding of ourselves. What do the Aztec descendants believe? Opinions vary. Some embrace the Utah theory. They see it as recovering lost truth. Others are skeptical. They want more proof. Still, others don't care about the exact location. For them, Aztlán is a spiritual concept, not a GPS coordinate. All of these perspectives are valid. People can disagree about history while respecting each other. People can have different interpretations while staying curious and open-minded. What about the broader implications? If Aztlán was in Utah, it would rewrite our understanding of ancient America. It would show that indigenous peoples moved more than we thought. It would show connections between regions we thought were separate. It would make North American history more complex and interesting. But it would also raise uncomfortable questions. If the Aztecs came from what's now the United States, does that change anything about modern borders? Does it change who has claims to what land? Does it change how we think about immigration? These questions are thorny. They mix the ancient past with modern politics. Therefore, the Aztlán debate will likely continue. New researchers will make new claims. New evidence will surface or won't. The mystery will persist because it serves a purpose. It keeps us thinking. It keeps us questioning. It keeps us engaged with our past. What should you believe? That's up to you. Look at the evidence we've presented. Think about the arguments on both sides. Consider what seems most likely. Consider what you want to be true. Then recognize the difference between those two things. Maybe someday we'll know for sure. Maybe future archaeologists will find the smoking gun. Maybe DNA studies will trace the Aztec lineage definitively. Maybe technology we haven't invented yet will solve the puzzle. Or maybe Aztlán will remain a mystery forever. Maybe some questions don't have answers. Maybe the search is more important than the finding. Here's what we know for certain. The Aztec people had a rich history. They built a great civilization. They had complex beliefs and deep knowledge. They told stories about where they came from. Those stories matter, whether they're literal or symbolic. The land itself tells stories too. Utah's canyons hold ancient art. Rivers flow through red rocks. Caves hide in the cliffs. These places are sacred to someone. They mean something to the people who lived there. We should respect that, whatever we believe about Aztlán. So explore, question, research, but stay humble, stay open. The past is vast. We understand only fragments of it. New discoveries await. The story isn't over yet. Where do you think Aztlán was? What do you believe?